Hello and welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie Spiker.
And I'm Candace Wersbowski.
And this week, I got the chance to talk with Carolyn Beans, who is a freelance science reporter covering all things food. Carolyn is currently freelancing with us here at Lancaster Farming to publish a series on climate-smart dairy through an MIT Environmental Solutions Journalism Fellowship. You can find her series on lancasterfarming.com, and we'll make sure to have it all linked in the show notes as well. And it's really pretty good timing for the series because if you guys didn't know, June is Dairy Month. And we ran a poll on our website the first week of June that led to a bit of debate in the office. So, Candace, what dairy product is most important to you?
Well, see, here's where the debate comes in, because the word is important.
Yep.
Right? It's not your favorite, which for me, it's a real close race between ice cream and cheese. And probably cheese just slightly beats out ice cream. I don't know. Come find me on a different day. I might have a different answer. But important for me is probably milk. Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously you can make the argument that like, well, without milk, you cannot have cheese, you cannot have ice cream or anything else. So it is kind of like the foundational aspect of all these foods. But for me, milk plays a huge role in my household. I have 2 kids and they both love milk. And I don't know what I would do if I wasn't able to get them milk, because especially my 3-year-old gets ornery when he's not able to have milk.
That's fair.
Yeah, it's very important to keeping the peace in my household at the very least.
All right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. And the debate was based on the wording of the question. And I feel like, because if we're going favorite, I would say ice cream. Absolutely. But if we're going like important to my daily life, I would also say milk, because I drink a lot of coffee and I can't drink black coffee. I'm not a fan of it that way. So I put milk in my coffee every single day. So if I don't have milk in the house, I can't have coffee, and then that's a problem. So,
all right then.
If you guys want to chime in on the debate, please do. You can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com. But in the meantime, let's bring Carolyn in and listen to all she has to say about her pretty in-depth reporting on Pennsylvania's dairy industry. Carolyn, welcome to the Farmhouse. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start. You do so much within agriculture and science and reporting. So tell me, what led you to that career of reporting on food through the lens of science?
Yes. Well, I had always really been interested in writing my whole life, ever since I was a kid. But I also was always very interested in plants. I actually worked on a flower farm all through high school. Then I worked on a wildflower preserve in college. So I studied English as an undergraduate, but then ultimately decided to go back to school to study plants. And so I ended up getting a PhD in biology. And soon after completing that degree, I switched to this career of science writing. And I landed specifically on my beat of food, farming, and agriculture. I think in part because I had always had this interest in plants. And, I worked on that flower farm back in high school, but also because I just find that talking about food is something that everyone is interested in. We all eat, we all have some feelings about food. And so it's a topic that allows me to cover a lot of science while just meeting people at a topic that I think they really care about.
Nice. That actually leads pretty perfectly into the next question I have for you. So I've looked over your website and all the different kind of articles you have on there, and you've covered such a broad range of topics, even within just food and ag. So dairy, pollination, biodiversity, artificial intelligence, vegetable breeding, so many others that I haven't even listed. So how do you take so many different, varied, relatively complex topics and then boil them down to something understandable for readers, especially for readers who might not have a very strong ag background?
Yeah, so I like to think that that is one of my main strengths. And I think it comes in part from the fact that I didn't think of myself as a science person growing up. I was interested in flowers, but I was an English major. I liked writing. And so when I decided to make that leap into studying science pretty seriously for 5 years, I worked on my PhD. I had to learn how to do a lot of translation. Just understanding what my colleagues were talking about required me to rush back to my desk and do a lot of Googling later.
Yeah.
So I really learned a lot about how to remove the jargon from science. But I've also learned that my audiences, they don't want jargon, but they do want to understand. They don't want topics to just be glossed over. So I really try very hard to sometimes get into the nitty-gritty of scientific topics, but in a language that I have learned to understand and that I hope that my readers do too.
Yeah. I feel like it's a delicate balance of explaining what needs to be explained, but in a way that, your readers are following what you're trying to explain to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, if I'm not really sure, I'll just have discussions with other people in my life who are not experts in science. And I find out what interests them and what sorts of questions they have. I love talking to my brother, for example. He's a really great sounding board on those sorts of topics.
So you are currently an MIT Environmental Solutions Journalism Fellow. So congratulations on that. That's very cool.
Thank you.
So can you explain a little bit about that fellowship and what it's for and what it's about?
Yeah, so the fellowship is designed to support journalists who are working on stories that explore environmental solutions specifically for local audiences. So I first learned about this fellowship, I guess, about a year ago, and I applied this past fall, and it just looked to me like this amazing opportunity to be able to do more reporting in Lancaster, particularly in-person reporting in Lancaster. I've been living here for about 5 years, and I'm surrounded by farms, and it's really wonderful to have had the chance to actually get out to dairies.
Yeah, there are lots of dairy farms around, that's for sure.
Yes.
So for this fellowship, you are specifically writing about climate-smart dairy farming in Pennsylvania, and your articles are actually being written for us here at Lancaster Farming. So for all of you listeners, you can head to our website, lancasterfarming.com, if you want to read any of the articles. And I feel like in agriculture in general, you get a lot of kind of buzzwords. And climate smart, it seems to be kind of the new buzzword that's floating around. And I saw the USDA definition says it's an approach that reduces or removes greenhouse gas emissions, builds resilience to the changing climate, and sustainably increases incomes and agricultural productivity. So to me, I think that definition does make sense. But what does it mean in a practical sense for dairy farmers?
Yeah, so I think that absolutely it's a new buzzword. And a lot of the experts in the industry I spoke with said, well, we used to call it other things, like maybe it was conservation or sustainability. So what climate smart means now, I think, is many of the things that a lot of dairies are already doing. So things like cover cropping count, things like no-till farming count. Also, some more of the newer technologies to bring down greenhouse gases also count. So things like methane digesters, or even something like a liquid solid separator that is bringing down greenhouse gases because it's reducing the abundance of microbes that like to live in really wet places where there is no oxygen. And those are the microbes that are producing methane, which is one of the big targets for greenhouse gas reduction. So those are the sorts of types of dairy practices that can be covered by this term climate smart.
Did you have a lot of experience writing about the dairy industry prior to, taking on this series?
The dairy industry, not specifically. I did do one story for NPR several years ago where my dad and I visited a dairy that also produced cheese, and we learned how to make cheese. And that was an amazing,
ideal. Yeah.
Wonderful experience. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. I think that was the only time that I wrote about a dairy previously. However, like I said, I do live in Lancaster, so I visit a lot of dairies with my 3 young boys. So I'm regularly visiting dairies, mostly for the ice cream and
same.
visiting with the cows. And I had been covering this topic of climate smart milk before writing these stories. I had conducted several interviews and just been following this topic for years. And that's often the case with the stories I produce. A lot of them take years before they actually come to a point where I'm ready to present them to audiences and also find a home for them, like I found with Lancaster Farming.
Yeah. So obviously, even just through reading through the articles, it's very clear that you have talked to many different dairy farmers in Pennsylvania. So have you seen a lot of kind of similarities in talking to all these different farmers about their thoughts and their practices on conservation and climate smart? Or is there a lot of variance between the farms?
Yeah, so I'll start with the similarities. So I think every single dairy farmer I spoke with had already done something to improve the sustainability of their farms, something to make those farms more environmentally friendly across the board, and in most cases, many things. So that's a similarity right there. Also, all of the dairy farmers I spoke with are very interested in making their farms more efficient. They're running businesses, of course, and it's a tough business to be in. And so they are they're always looking for new ways to make their farms more efficient, to find better uses for their manure through different management strategies, for example. And so I do think that there was some difference in terms of how farmers might feel about the term climate smart, or where those farmers feel their responsibility might be to reduce greenhouse gas emissions specifically. But those differences, in many ways, were really not the central point of my stories, because what I was looking for was to find those places where the goals of increasing a farm's efficiency and the goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions overlap. And there's actually a huge area of overlap between those different goals.
Nice.
So that was really exciting to find.
Yeah. Was that kind of going into it what you sort of expected to find, or was that a little more of a bit of a surprise?
I think it was a bit of a surprise. I didn't realize how many of these practices that bring down greenhouse gas emissions really are beneficial to farmers. The farmers know this already. This is not news to them. Like, for example, one particular technology, for example, that came up repeatedly was a solid liquid separator, because that's so beneficial to farmers, because many of them told me that once you separate the solids and the liquids from your manure, you can use those solids as bedding for your cows. So that saves you money there. You can just reduce the overall volume that you might have in your lagoons or wherever it is that you may be storing your manure. And so that's beneficial, because you're not having to spread manure as often if it's not a time of year, for example, that you even want to be spreading it. And then that liquid portion is really beneficial then to be used as a liquid fertilizer in the field. So having that technology is really beneficial. It's also a technology that is really effective at, as I said before, reducing those microbes that produce methane.
In all of your interviewing and visiting these farms for this series, has there been like a favorite thing you've learned or a favorite memory that stands out?
Gosh, two of the farms that I visited, I didn't write about this a whole lot in this story, but maybe, or in this series, but maybe in future series, two of the farms that I visited accept food waste for their methane digesters. So that was just amazing to see the amount of food that is delivered to these dairies from retailers who have food that they can't sell to the public anymore for whatever reason. It's, in many cases, I think it's because it's reaching the expiration date. And so these dairy farmers are able to accept this food, which they earn money for, put it into their anaerobic digesters mixed in with the manure, and use that food to actually help generate electricity through the anaerobic digester to power their farms, and in many cases to send that power out into the community. So that was really cool to see. And just in terms of surprises, just, seeing mounds and mounds and mounds of like boxes of food, that wasn't something I was expecting to see on the dairy.
Yeah, digesters are really fascinating, just how they work and what they're able to do, for sure. They are very cool.
Yes. Just the whole experience of seeing these digesters in action, that really drove home to me that many dairy farmers, they are also engineers. And I've learned, going back to what you were asking earlier about what to share with audiences, I found that dairy farmers are also chemists. They know that soil chemistry so well.
Yeah.
So in some earlier drafts, I maybe didn't get into the nitty-gritty of what is happening in nitrogen in the soil, for example, enough. And then after talking to dairy farmers, I realized, no, they want to know where that nitrogen is going, and they are experts in soil chemistry.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, the U.S. food system, I'm sure you are well aware, is big and kind of complex. So how would you recommend, both for consumers and for farmers, how would you recommend them staying on top of everything they might need to know? And is there anything that you wish more people understood?
Yeah, so I really try very hard with my reporting on food to never tell people what they should eat. I try to just share the best information that I have, the most scientifically rigorous information, and let people make their own choices, because I feel like there are, food is so personal. And when we go to the grocery store, all of us, we are weighing so many things, right? Like you're looking at food and you're thinking, okay, well, first of all, is this affordable for my family? Is it nutritious for my family? Is it going to taste good? How is it going to impact our health? And then, of course, there's this question of how is it going to impact the environment? And then there are also some people are very concerned about animal welfare issues. So there are all of these factors that we are all weighing to different degrees every time we go to the grocery store. I personally find it kind of exhausting sometimes. So for me personally, I fall back on the words of Michael Pollan, which some listeners might be familiar with. He is an excellent food journalist, and he says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Mostly plants doesn't mean you need to like eliminate meat from your diet. But if you're trying to have a diet that has a lower impact on the environment, and that also is good for your own personal health, I think those are 3 rules that I go by. But again, I don't like to tell people what should be their North Star of deciding on food.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, you sometimes for years in advance are planning stories and what you plan on covering. So now that, you're starting to wrap up the Climate Smart Milk and this type of series, what is kind of on your horizon ag-wise? Is there anything specific that you've really been looking forward to diving into?
Yes. I can tell you that I have been following for also a couple years now the possibility of the linen industry expanding in Pennsylvania. So, and that's a story I'm reporting on now. I don't know exactly when I'm going to publish it or even where it's going to land, but there are efforts to start growing more flax in Pennsylvania, which historically was done like during colonial times. And now there is a group called the PA Flax Project that is trying to get it going again. And I think Lancaster Farming has actually reported on this as well.
Yes, we've actually had one of the leaders of the PA Flax Project on our FarmHouse podcast before. I'm trying to remember how long ago that episode was, but it is out there. So for anyone listening to this, if you want to go back through the discography, you'll find that one on there somewhere.
Yeah, I learned about their work at the PASA conference in Lancaster a couple years ago. So I think it's a very exciting project. So that is one thing I'm exploring.
Nice. Well, I will be looking forward to finding and reading those articles whenever they find a home sometime.
Yeah.
So what does being a woman in agriculture mean to you?
As a woman in agriculture, or a woman who's regularly writing about agriculture, I am constantly balancing business, this small business that I'm running here as a freelance writer, as well as raising my 3 young kids here in Lancaster. And I have an excellent role model for this through the farmer who I worked for way back years ago when I was in high school. The farmer who was running this flower farm that I worked at. It was a team, a husband and wife team, but my main boss was the wife. And she taught me so much about hard work, and she taught me about turning out a product that I could really be proud of. And also, she taught me about managing so many things at once, as anyone on a farm has to do. And now I'm finding, as a science reporter with a family, I'm also constantly managing many things all at once.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I've found doing this podcast where even though I don't live and work directly on a farm, there are things that I've learned from so many of the different women in ag that I've talked to that I can kind of translate into my life anyway. Like just these wonderful kind of little nuggets of wisdom that they all tend to share, that it's like, oh yeah, I can take that and use that in some way. So I love your answer.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, that will wrap us up here. So thank you, Carolyn, so much for joining us on the Farmhouse. And again, for all of our listeners, you can read all of her coverage on the Climate Smart Milk at lancasterfarming.com. So thank you again.
Thanks again for having me. This has been really fun.
Listening to Carolyn talk was fascinating, and I gotta say, I was surprised to hear that she wasn't always involved in science, that she was, I believe, an English major first. I can't imagine, as a English major myself, making the transition to science.
Yeah.
I was amused hearing her story about as she was, first acclimating to the new environment, having to run to her computer to go Google things that she wasn't familiar with. So hats off to her for doing that. And I have to believe that kind of, influenced her belief that we should try to remove jargon from science, at least when we're presenting it to the public.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of exciting things happening in ag science, and Carolyn is certainly investigating some of these things. But it's kind of all for naught if no one can understand what those things are, because, things are getting lost in translation because there's too much jargon.
Yeah.
I like the idea of, explaining to people using layman's terms so that they can understand why things are important, and almost more importantly, how they can apply them in everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like not just in science, but in agriculture specifically, there is a new kind of buzzword every few months. Mm-hmm. And it makes it hard to keep up with what we're talking about, I think. So, yeah, it's important for people to actually understand what's going on in agriculture and in food, because it impacts all of us, as we've talked about many times on this podcast.
Right. And kind of, having to do with that, one of the things I liked hearing about were the digesters. And I thought it was really cool that she said that, they're having restaurants or whatnot bring food waste or food that's, about to rot into these digesters, because they can also be digested with manure, I guess would be the word, and be used to make electricity. Because that is something that I feel like it's, large scale now. Like, these digesters are huge. They're used to power, entire farms. But in the future, that will probably be able to be scaled down into something that you could potentially have in your house. And it kind of takes like composting to a new level.
Yeah.
Where you can throw your banana peels on your compost pile, or you could throw them into your digester and maybe help power your house.
Oh, that would be super cool. That's actually something I wish I was better at, was composting. It's something my parents have always done. Maybe not always done, but like since I was a teenager, my parents would compost, and they still do it now. And it's something that I kind of tried starting when I, got my own place, and I didn't really follow through with it. And it's definitely something that I think about a lot, is going back to that. But if I had the opportunity to have a tiny digester somewhere on my property, I would absolutely do it.
Yeah, it could be really cool. This is going to be the way of the future. People always talk about flying cars, but instead I think they should be talking about like, what can we use from our trash to power our homes?
Incredible. Also, I wanted to mention before we wrap up that we talked about the PA Flax project a little bit in the interview, and we had previously done a FarmHouse episode with Emma DeLong, who is part of the PA Flax project, and I could not for the life of me remember who it was or when we talked to her, but thankfully we have that for you now. So it's Emma DeLong's episode, which was back in February of 2024. So if you want to go find that and listen and learn more about the PA Flax project, that's for you, and we'll make sure we link that as well below.
Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And if you really liked this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for listening and visiting us at the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Candace.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2025 by Lancaster Farming newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Wierzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock and Justin Berger. The music is by Tin Bird Shadow.